Hi, everybody. I know we're live. Just bear with me. I'm going to go share this out and then I'll give a proper intro here.
One moment,
Oh,
please.
yes, I do. Mm, Hold on. Why is this giving me a hard time? Thank you. Okay. I think I got it all shared out. And I just get my chat set up here. Hi, everybody. Sorry, it's still me running off a cell phone. So, okay. We are set up and we are going. All right. So, this is where I'll cut my audio down and I'll actually start, like, give you a good intro and then we'll get into this.
All right.
Welcome, everybody, back to the After Dark Show. I'm Don Rogers. Joining me again this week is a very close friend of mine from beautiful British Columbia, Canada. I have no other words. He is a professional teacher. He is one of the most learned people that I've ever met. He has some amazing abilities with some healing modalities and just a very, very wise soul. And I always enjoy our conversations and our sessions that we've had. And I wanted to bring him back on because he's very well versed in a lot of things, one of them being Gnostic and Gnosticism. And for like somebody like myself that just kind of like popped online and fell ass backwards into all of this, these are one of the questions because like a lot of people that have been in this game and in this field and in this area for so long, just kind of like, oh yeah, it's Gnostic. And when you're new, you're like, well, what's that? And you're like, oh, it's this. And then you find something else on Google. So it's actually really good to be able to talk to somebody that's been in the scene longer and has a bit more knowledge. Now, I did my typical Google bot thing, and I found by their definition. So, just to by definition, Gnosticism is a belief that the salvation and true reality of our universe is a process of encountering and understanding with divine revelations and awakening of the spark from within. Knowledge is the pathway on which we return to our spiritual origin.
Right. Yeah. So there's a million places to begin with the Gnostics, Gnosticism. Like most of these things, I don't think it's fair to think that it's like one school of thought, of course. There's many, many schools of thought, and there's the historical, and there's contemporary, and there's different mystery schools, and there's a lot of controversy with it. Um, so that's the first part to start with. Uh, Basically, Gnosticism can be called a dualistic system. And why it's a dualistic system, two things, is that it has a very contentious claim that there are two gods. Okay. And for lack of a better term. So, for the lack of a better term, a positive and a negative God. Okay. One that's more beneficent and another that's not. And I think even from just saying that, you can already hear like this Enki, Enlil. These are like types of archetypes that continue to ripple through time. And so that's why there's different stories and they repeat in different ways and they're similar in similar ways as well. So it'll go into like, things like Zoroastrianism, Mithraism, like I was saying, the Sumerian stuff. Then there's the Christian stuff that comes later. But they're all pertaining to this way of looking at a worldview that perhaps And in the Gnostic point of view, what's generally referred to as Gnosticism is saying, perhaps the world we live in is one of illusion, and that this world is in fact controlled, or at least threatened by, a very malevolent entity. Okay. So that's just a starting off point that's trying to keep it simple.
Yeah, and it really does get weird for me because it's like, okay, oh, I just got mind wiped again. God damn it. I'm sorry.
Don't
This
worry.
happened.
You got a cool video effect between your UFO and the way the light's hitting on your face when you turned your head there, so it's good.
So I guess if we can just even go into like where did this principle sort of start, right? Like I know you may not know the exact origin, but when does it start to really become prevalent in society that it's a way of thinking? Like,
Right. Well, it's always been sort of an underground movement. Okay. It's obviously a very controversial worldview to say that the world that you live in is generally uh, an evil place, or it's an illusion, some kind of prison set up by a malevolent entity. That you're always probably going to be in the minority having that viewpoint. I was listening to a Jewish scholar before this talk about it, and he had his own way of going about the subject, and he brought in some really good historical facts. But again, I think it's a kind of subject that it is a form of mysticism. Everything involved with Gnosticism, it would be like in the previous episode, we talked about the esoteric and the exoteric. So the esoteric being the private, occult side of things, and the exoteric being the public view of things within. So you have like sort of institutional religion where people do the, like, say, Catholic Mass and these types of rituals. And then you have a more secretive side, a more symbolic interpretation of, and a more historical side, but it's kept private for a select group of people to understand. So for that reason, it's going to be a little difficult. Now, historically, there's an interesting group of people called the Cathars that lived in like southeast France and parts of Italy and that. And this group of people claim to be more the descendants of what they claim was the true teachings of Jesus before the Roman state overtook Christianity. And so their viewpoint is one where they say, look, no, God is love, God is spirit. This whole idea of sin and original sin and guilt and Jesus dying for your sins, that is all a corruption of the true message of Jesus. And we want to live, and we want to transcend this physical illusion and remember that we live in a physical illusion, and remind ourselves that we are spiritual beings, sort of going back to the first definition you gave me. So they did a practice that would be, say, very well, in the view of the Catholic Church, they were concerned because they were sort of like anarchists in a way. There are these people, today you would look at it as a group like the Quakers or something, or the Amish, living apart from the society because they disagree with the ways of the world at the time. So I think in some cases you had them as being vegetarians and other things like this. And they were, of course, brutally destroyed by the Catholic Church. They just, like, time and time again. And it's sort of a point of history that really got deleted out for a long time. But just it's interesting to see. So if you go back to it, and what they were sort of claiming their heritage was, is if you look at it with the early Christians and that too, early Christianity is a very radical philosophy, if you want to call it that, not even a religion yet, but or a mystic school. And I mean, there's many arguments that the early Christians were into entheogens, right? Revealing the God within, and that the actual Christian sacrament would be probably related to certain plant medicines that these groups of people took together. Like, we're not the first kids on the block. It's not finally like LSD gets discovered and then we have this psychedelic era and then it all goes from there. Like this, we've had entheogens as long as time. And so this interesting thing is, again, you go back to the esoteric and the exoteric. Well, what did they say? Well, they turn it into this weird, like if you look at the Catholic Mass, like for their sacrament, I mean, it's an interesting ritual because you're taking the body of Christ into your mouth and drinking his blood because he died for your sins and all of this. And that's the official sacrament. And that's where this war against drugs comes from, because they're like, look, the only way you access God is through us, and it's by doing our prescribed rituals. By no means should you be going ahead and go tripping balls out in the woods and realizing there's maybe more to reality than what we're giving you. By no means should you do that. And so this was the real threat to the order. Now, I'm not saying all the Gnostic went around. They did more things like, and there's different things. It doesn't have to be entheogens. So you can have, you see things like dancing. They were big into dancing, ecstatic dancing. And we see this in different cultures and, where, First Nations have all of their powwows and the different songs and the types of ecstatic dancing. This is to induce people into mystical states so that they can see beyond the veil of illusion. So that's a simple and way that I can just bring it out and give us a bit of feeling before we start getting into all the controversies and this people say this and this say that, and it just ends up being a carousel of confusion if you really try to study some of this stuff.
Yeah. I'm gonna do a this guy said this, but it's somebody both you and I watch. Steven at BG Cast had an episode. He was talking about some of the Gnostics, and he was also talking about entheogen ceremonies in the churches, right? And that's why they set up a certain way. And
Sorry,
that's what the organ, they would put them in that, they would entomb them in the front. You would go on your trip, and to get you back, you would follow the sound of the organs. Right. And it was this weird, I can't even remember the religion he said it was, but it was in the old cathedral. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the thing is that you can go to so-called primitive cultures. People will look at the huge ayahuasca industry in Peru and stuff like this. I mean, so people have always known about these things, right? That they can trip out. And this, of course, is a huge threat to a lot of established order, because there's a remembering and there's levels of knowledge that aren't controlled, right? You don't have censorship in the same way when people can work within these entheogens and these different mystical states. So the interesting thing, though, is it's not like those entheogens weren't being used on the inside circle, in the most elite echelons of the hierarchy, but within the closed occult ceremonies. This is shown especially with things like the royalty. You know how you have like the fur? There's like a royal fur, and it has like the you'll have like a red and the white. This is all signifying like that the Pope has this. This is all signifying, if you look at it carefully, the Amanita muscaria mushroom, right? Now, although there's a whole story about Santa Claus and Coca-Cola, Santa is also deeply related to the mystery of the Amanita muscaria mushroom. The Queen's white fur with flecked black pieces is also a relationship to that. And it's been argued too that the royalty were actually tripping balls on things like mushrooms and Amanita muscaria and everything else. This is just for them and, wafers and wine for the masses. Okay, so they got access to the inner mysteries. They have the knowledge. And if we're looking at Gnosticism again, what is it coming? Gnosis. The root word of Gnosticism is coming from gnosis, which is the Greek word for knowledge, which is coming from the Latin sciere, which is to know, and all of this kind of stuff. Okay, but the point being, this has been running concurrently, right? So these mystery schools have kept these things to themselves, the knowledge to access other dimensions. And the same thing when your Masons are doing their certain ones, not all of them, of course, but the ones who do practice the more magical arts know about how to access and invoke these entities, and the whole floodgate is opened. Right? So that's the way of looking at
Yeah.
it.
You've alluded to it a couple of times that, like, if you choose to, like, believe these things or practice these things, kind of looked at it as an outsider in society. And you and I were talking about something before, and it's from a television show, but it was eloquently explained in a cartoon of all things that society is slavery with extra steps. It's just you working for a guy to pay for a house who's paying for his thing. I would love to get into, like, is what me and Spin want to do considered a type of Gnosticism? Because we want to go almost as far off grid and away from society. We want to be those people that are barely in what we're supposed to be, because we've seen what it is. We've actually seen the ugly little trap, and it's like, no, as soon as we can leave, we are.
Right.
If we can be like yourself, if we can become self-sustained outside of the system, bye. Right? So is that a Gnostic viewpoint or belief system, or is
I
that
guess
just
in a certain liberal interpretation, sure. But there's people who still, the main catch isn't what you're doing. It's about why you're doing what you're doing and how you see yourself in what you're doing is. So let's put it this way. There are the prepper types that are like, I need to have my guns, I got to do this, I got to have provisions because I'm scared the world's going to end, and I got to take care of myself, and da, 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 da. I would not say that's a very Gnostic point of view, because a person is still responding and acting out of the fear-based response. As much as they would never admit it, that's what it is. But a person who's like, well, it's all just a big joke, and this is obviously a slave system and everything else, and then actually lives a life where they're happy and doing what they want and maybe connecting with the community of people and trying to develop themselves on a spiritual level to become more refined individuals that are self-responsible but feel empowered and involved, but not taking their material reality too seriously. Just, it's just like, look, we're here, we don't need to impress anyone, and we don't need to flaunt what we have. Yeah, I would say that is more of the Gnostic orientation. So you see how with mysticism, it doesn't matter. And that's where people are like, this is right and that is wrong. Like, if you're in black and white thinking, you're in the wrong territory still, because that's the wrong kind of dualism, right? The whole point of it is to look beyond. What is the veil of illusion? And illusion comes in many forms, right? So they're not just looking at the physical, like the seeing things, but it's all of the senses. And again, learning to not be limited by the senses, but to push and develop the senses and to go beyond the senses and to understand there's things of a greater value than just the material realm. So let's bring in the negative side for a second. The opposite negative side would be the opposite entity. I'm sorry, people messaging me. Let me just close my messenger stuff. Sorry, help me recap that just for a sec. I lost myself. Um, oh yeah, so the opposite side is where you have an entity. Let's say we're talking about that dual God aspect for a second. An entity like what's known as Ahriman in Steiner's philosophy, right? And Ahriman is a god of materialism. Not just materialism, like, oh, I like bling and all this. It's one where it says the universe is only that which is material. And it wants to actually put everything as an object and a thing that can be sort of limited and controlled within the material realm. And today, that's where we've just gone through a split in our society recently, where people had to look at living in towards a fear-based response and a material answer to that fear-based response, you know, or one that was like, well, no, that there is something beyond, and it's not even just because of the material argument. There's that, right? So we're currently experiencing it as a society, the people who are going to be nuts and bolts only. And you see it even things like the UFO community, right? The people are all nuts and bolts UFOs, and then there's the people with just spirituality UFOs. And then, of course, the truth is a far more complex thing about what you're looking at. So yeah, so you got this other side, this very materialistic side, and it wants to strip everything else out. And that's where it's wanting to strip out the human spirit, right? Is sort of a drive towards that, and where it will have total control. And how's it going to get total control? Through willful submission to that control structure, right?
Karen, I do have a question from the audience, but this is ironic because Karen Holton and I were just talking about like the Matrix construct and comparing it to the flea circus, how they used to train a flea circus. They just put holes in a tin can or a glass jar, and the fleas learn they can only jump so high, and they'll only jump so high, and they can only jump so many ways. And then if you take the jar away, they never stop jumping like that. And then the next generations will see the parents and they'll just jump like that too. And third generation will go, oh shit, there's my uncle. I better do that too. And everybody just jumps up and down because that's what they think they're supposed to do. Nobody looks outside of the construct that isn't even really there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's what it is, right? It's living beyond that construct and coming into consciousness. And how most consciousness comes into ancient remembering. Mm-hmm.
That I want to get into as well. Derek, well, Woo Rider, DG asked, what are your thoughts on the Cathars? He'd like you to
so that's what we were saying with the Cathars. So, you know, I'm just getting secondhand reporting. I've been reading a lot of a couple of books by Neil Haig recently. He's excellent. He knows a lot about Gnosticism and probably lives a Gnostic lifestyle. If you know him, he's a friend of Pierre Sabak and David Icke. He did actually the artwork for some of David Icke's books. He's really interesting Gnostic, and he talks a lot about the Cathars and visited those regions in France and stuff where they'd lived. It's basically they were unorthodox is the simplest way to put it. The church was orthodox and they were unorthodox, and showing that people could live perfectly well and happy in an existence, like I said, where they were, you know, they were egalitarians. They, meaning, you know, they looked at people as equal. They were, you know, nonviolent generally. Like I guess they had to defend themselves, but, you know, generally eschewed, you know, violence, the state, all of these kinds of things, these constructs that you have to have, like a hierarchy and control of other people. And they knew everything what the Romans had done and what the church was, and we're completely against that. And that's the simplest way to boil down the Cathars, as far as I know. I haven't studied a lot more other than mostly what I read through Neil Hagg and, some encyclopedia kinds of articles. But they are unfortunately a people lost to history because the victors destroyed them. So we have like these very fragmented accounts that have to be interpreted through anthropologists and scamp writings here and there. And they would have preferred that they were erased altogether and we wouldn't even know what their name is at this point. So, yeah.
Um, I want to go from there to something else, but it's very related. Is Gnosticism so convoluted and hidden and hard to understand because of the separation of science and spirituality? Like you have, like you were saying, church is church because you have to do it the church way. Well, there used to be a scientific, like there's elements that have been separated deliberately by those who run whatever the fuck this is.
Mm.
And it's been done deliberately, so we can't figure these things out because we're taught not to cross these two things. Even separation of church and state, separation, like science must stay 500 yards from spirituality. It just seems that it's always that way. But when you start putting them together, you start seeing things in a much different manner.
Yeah. Well, it's because it's, they created a, I don't want to make it like public education. We think of regular schools, but there's rings of knowledge, right? And so certain people are just meant to stay confined within certain rings, going back to your flea circus thing. And so the management of academic and intellectual thought is a huge part of that. And so you can create these partitions. You can say, hey, this is called economics now. Prior to like the 50s, it used to always be called political economy because the idea that you would separate the politics from the economics was absurd. Of course, politics runs economics and economics runs politics. Why would you even say otherwise? And it was only a reaction against the Soviet Union that said, we've come up with a science here of economics, not political economy. There's nothing political. This is the science of communism. And so and then the capitalists reacted and said, well, we got the science of capitalism and tried to like take out the politics side of it. So when you really start digging through history, you realize there's always these different revolutions in how we think and how things have changed. And people don't even miss a beat in the march. They don't even realize anything changed. It changes so fast at times. So yeah, I would agree. And I mean, it's absurd because I mean, it's not like this current thinking of like science is against, science versus spirituality, let's just say, not even religion. It's completely ridiculous. This is a completely new term that was this invented very recently, in some ways, because science is people were very interested in using scientific instruments to be able to explore paranormal and occult things. 150, 130 years ago or more, right? Around 1890s and that 1870s, 80s, 90s, 1900, 1910, etc. There's a huge interest in things like science. And people are actually very scientific wanting to understand it. And they were like, oh, science is actually a great tool that we can get past some of the superstitious elements of the past, but we can really prove this stuff. And it was quite different than this one that you have today, which is, the science, as they term so well in the last few years. Like, this is an absurd concept, the science. Like, grammatically, it doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, there's a lot of politics involved.
Yeah, I bite my tongue on this a lot, and it's going to show my little bit of nerd side that did stick. That whole phrasing of trust the science. Well, science is a practice of experimentation. So that means it's pretty much always developing and evolving. So how do you trust something that isn't static?
Yeah. Well,
Right? Science.
yeah, exactly. Well, it's a they're making it a direct object when you say the science. But yeah, it's always been sciences. And even this word is corrupted, right? Because people are like, oh, science, so that means no, there's physical sciences. When we often use the word science today, we're talking the description of the three main physical sciences: biology, chemistry, physics. Those are what we call sciences. But you translate, the word science is used more technically in other languages. In German, for example, like my friend said to me, she introduced herself, she's like, yes, well, history, I am a historical scientist. I'm a historian. We are scientists. And you're like, what do you mean history is a science? But it just means knowledge, scare, SCIERE. It just means knowledge. So there's the physical. So what you can see is that there's this shift to try to just make science only this, what we would call empirical studies, where, and especially something that you can test and you can prove and you can reproduce the results. That's the latest change in the semantics of language, and one of the main reasons why our consciousness cannot properly develop is because without the correct concepts, we are always going to misuse language. And as we misuse language, we are in that metaphorical jar. So that's why one of the main means of control is language. That's why one of the most radical things you can do, to go back to what I was saying earlier, is to remember. Remembering is the most radical thing anybody can do. You don't even have to be this, that on the political spectrum. You can just say, I remember last week you said this, and now you're saying the opposite. That's just memory. It shows that the lowliest of intellects can see through things by simply remembering, and that there's something very powerful in the process of forgetting and trying to rewrite. And what we've been seeing, especially because the past few years have been so compressed, so much change is happening so fast, is becoming more obvious. Like, hey, wait a second, I remember that we just said a couple of years ago this. Now we're saying this. For example, Al Gore came out with that film back in the day, the documentary on the global warming stuff, and people are going back and say, hey, Al Gore said we'd all be underwater by now. All ice caps would be melted, right? Didn't he say that? Right? It wasn't like, why isn't somebody being called on that? Like, that's not even your left. But nowadays people are like, oh, you must be blah, 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 because they want to put you in the camps. They want to keep you divided. They want to keep you committing your energy to their prison. And they've got both polarities. They got it all. And that's the biggest part of the problem now, is because people don't want to think for themselves.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how else to phrase this, but a stupid slave is a handy slave. Like,
Yeah.
I still shudder at the fact when my youngest daughter was 16, she had to sign something for the first time, and I brought her a government document, and I was like, you got to fill this out. It was for school or something.
Yeah.
I'm like, sign. And she starts printing her name. I'm like, no, sign it. She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, write your name. She's like, I don't know how to write.
Right.
I'm like, get the fuck out of here.
Look at that. It's
She's
amazing,
like,
right?
oh, I don't know how to sign my name. I'm like, what? Like, they tell you
Do you
if
notice
there's
they've
a
changed
friggin'
it now?
headline
Everything's gone down back to, you only have to do initials. You don't even have to sign a lot of things nowadays. Initials are good enough. Back like when people were illiterate, back in, they show like those Wild West movies and people sign with an X because he never learned his letters. That's the level. They're pushing everything backwards rapidly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I said. Yeah, like I couldn't believe it, because like I get the most, when I was a single parent, I would get the most nonsensical notices from the public school system. But they failed to tell me that they stopped teaching my daughter cursive.
Right. No, that's the whole point of giving you nonsensical messages about everything. Well, they're on top of everything. They must be on top of this too. And that's the assumption. And anybody I say puts their kids in the public, I'm like, well, talk to some people who are in it. Like you're assuming your kid's experience is the same as what your experience was when you went through school back in the 80s or whatever. It's not that anymore. Yeah. So just this, we like you look at vocabulary. I'm not saying everybody had a great vocabulary in the past, but if you go back again, 19th century, late 1800s, people's level of vocabulary was like through the roof because people were reading. Literate people read, and it was a great sign of intelligence to have a good vocabulary. And that's just being destroyed. The grammar. They purposely took Latin and Greek out of school, saying, "Oh, it's just elitist. Nobody needs to know that garbage. Nobody needs to know grammar." And now we can all, what, I don't know, act like we're. It's pretty bad when I was teaching kids in third most least developed countries. We're getting better literacy than what I see here nowadays. In a foreign language, they knew how to speak English better than people who were native English. Most of them do, because they're at least taught the formal systems of why things work the way they do. And most people who are native English speakers don't even have that. So it's this, it is a thought control. And of course, you notice, well, what happened at the height of the age of print and writing? Then they finally start to introduce media, different media. So we had newspapers. They start having mass newspapers. Well, that was really beneficial, wasn't it? Not at all. Radio, television, all systems of propaganda, all systems of centralized control, right? So that there was a very brief window where there was proper expression. Anyhow, I don't want to veer too far off from Gnosticism, but it's to see there's very concrete examples of how things change. And I
And
don't always look at it that
yeah,
we're getting to a better place. I think we have to maybe, my thoughts are actually we need to go radically back in the past and restore the excellence of the past rather than some weird dystopian sci-fi thing that we, you know.
I'm kind of laughing because you're talking about going to the past, and my wife is at her spinning wheel like a foot and a
Yeah,
half from me right now. So
yeah,
I was trying not to giggle when you said that. Like,
yeah. Well, because ultimately, isn't it supposed to be functioning for us? You know, the technology is supposed to be helping us. It's not supposed to possess us. And that's what it does, especially when we're buying it on credit and everything else. It's possessing us. Your mortgage payment is
yeah,
telling you to go to work every morning. It possesses you. The house, you know what they call it in Chinese? I love Chinese. In the Asian languages, it's so direct about certain things. They just call it, if you're a mortgager, like if you're a mortgager, they just call it slave to house. Because that's what you are. You're a slave to your house, right?
I
Uh,
love that. You need to have a conversation. Well, and that brings me back to something that was taken out of schools, and I think it was partly done to hide a lot of things. And let's get into entomology because look at the word mortgage. Break that down.
yeah, well,
Mortgage. How
we have enough French in Canada to know that, right? More death, gosh,
yeah,
pledge, because you'll pay it until you're practically dead. Is the point? It
yeah.
is a death pledge, and more importantly, a lot of times people don't focus on the term pledge. Now, don't even get me into mortgages, but there's Gnosticism in everything. I'd want to bring this to be a palpable, real thing rather than an academic debate only. If people
Yeah.
understood the more, when you pledge, you are the pledge. Well, think about we know things like frat houses, and they sponsor people in that the new person coming in, what do they call them? The
The
pledge.
pledge.
Oh, so they get
Right.
fuck with us?
Right. So yeah, you are self-sacrificing yourself in place of this agreement, right? And most people, like, they really don't understand mortgages. I know this awesome guy. When I finally get my channel going properly, I'm gonna interview him. I loved watching him before. His name's Timothy Madden. He was a guy he knows he knows all the grammar in a mortgage agreement, and he's an expert on like the language in mortgage agreements. And he's like, you have no idea, this is legalese. They could just switch the grammar of the terms. in different ways, and it means a completely different thing legally, using the same words, just in a different order. And they do that multiple times through the document, dozens of times. It is so convoluted and that people, it seems legitimate, but in reality, every single aspect of your mortgage is screwing it. And what you're actually doing is you are pledging the credit. Actually, they don't lend you anything. And they lie when they say that they create the money on a computer. They don't create the money on a computer. That is not true, that they just do a keystroke. This is one of the modern lies. This is part of the, so we're doing our own Gnosticism here. The reality is you create the credit because you're pledging yourself. When you do the initial loan applications in that, they've already turned these things into securities, which are financial instruments. They're already selling it on the international markets. And what banks do not create money, nor do they lend money, nor do they hold money. They are credit reinsurers. They only reinsure credit. You created credit, they reinsure credit, and then through manipulation of language and your lack of education, don't get you to realize that they get you to pay back the money that you created, that they used to go let you money back. And they make several fold. They make 4 times whatever you signed for. They've already made 4 times the principal by the time you walk out of the bank. 4 times the principal. Because they have sent it out on international, and you go to a bank and you do it because you do the pre-application where you're pre-authorized. You know how you're pre-authorized for a mortgage? Well, they've already created security off of that. You've had to show a proof of income, this and that, etc. That actually became a financial instrument. That's the underwriting that they use to start to go and do the whole thing. They never created one part of their money, their reserves, that they ever take out. They never committed 1 penny. They never gave you 1 penny. They simply reinsured your credit. So let's get into a bit of Gnosticism. I like using some concrete examples like this. So let's get into the symbolism, just because it sounds like I'm getting a bit technical and out of the room for a minute. All right.
Yep.
Draw me a dollar sign with your finger. Okay. So you got 2 kinds of dollar signs.
Oh,
I can't see it because our green screen thing. So there's the one with 1 line through it, and there's one with 2 lines through it. The one with 2 lines through it is the American dollar. I don't know if they ever taught you that in school. Like back in the old days in school, you could ask questions like, what does that mean? They're like, that's for US dollars. That single one is for like other currencies. And the reason why, because that dollar, first of all, is a debt. There is no money, first of all, in this system. I love people like, oh, money is the most important thing in the world. Well, you guess what? It's not 1935 anymore. There hasn't been money in nearly a century. We have a credit system. And we have an insurance system for credit. And it's a little convoluted, but that S stands for scrip. Like that's what sailors are paid. Scrip, company scrip. It's a note, right? It's scrip.
Wow.
It's just a private fiction of a note that you write. It's called a bank note for a reason. Okay. And the I stands for international. And the other line, insurance script. International insurance script. And it's conveniently has the snake going up the poles.
So is that why they basically removed hard commodities like your gold and silver and platinum? That's why very few average Joes trading those, and we get this fucking fake paper money.
Well, after World War II, when you have the setting up of the Bretton Woods system, right? People don't understand anything that's being done because you're not taught anything in the school, and you actually have to go very high in post-secondary before they even start to tell you the truth. They'll tell you it's just like masonry: first degree, second degree, third degree, bachelor's, master's, doctorate, right? So it gives you the first degree lies, and that's why you have a Masonic V when you graduate. You have the mortar board. What is a mortar board for? We've squared the circle, the head. We have dominated this mind. That's what it's symbolizing. It's all a Masonic system, too.
Holy shit.
See, and that's where getting too deep into certain conspiracy is a big distraction. We got to see that the conspiracy of everyday life is far, far deeper than we can possibly imagine. Right.
That's wild.
So we haven't really had a money system since the Great Depression. Right? The whole gold standard, people say it's with Nixon. No, that's after with the Americans reinvent it. But the reality is we didn't. We have the International Monetary Fund, which regulates this. This was part of the system that created the international insurance script system through central banks and everything else. This whole thing that we have, bond market, a bond. What? Who's bonded? What's bond mean? Slavery.
Yeah.
Right? Your bondsman.
Oh my God.
It's your creditor.
Sorry.
Your pledge. Every single human being is a pledge for their government. And then they raise money on international capital markets because they pledged your future labor energy to get investment in, and they all are doing this to each other. So people are like, who owns the debt? Everybody. They all own each other's debt. That's how they've kept the peace in the post-World War, Second World War.
So that's why they ask you on a job application, are you bondable?
Especially bondable in that sense is if you can also be securitized. Yes, if they can create everything securitized. And when you start to really understand the language and understanding the finance and law are two sides of the same coin. Now here's an occult truth, okay? Because we can say words like this, but we have to examine the metaphor a little bit. You see, with the coin, you can only see one side at a time. Right? You can only see one face of a coin at a time. You can't see both faces of a coin at the same time. You just can't. So it's designed. So when you think it's law, it's actually finance. When it's finance, it's actually law. It's all it's talking politics. You think it's economics. When it's economics, it's actually politics. You see how and so you're always being hidden by at least half the truth. So this is part of the compartmentalization that is being set up.
That is so messed up. I'm so glad we had this conversation because you just made me realize a whole lot of shit all at once. Dan, trigger to download.
This is Gnosis. Welcome to Gnosis. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is a modern day power that we can reclaim for ourselves when we have this knowledge. Because how do they stay in power? Through our ignorance. Right? It's our ignorance that powers the system. Our subservience, we're victims, and what can you do? Oh well, what can you do? You can't win. You can't fight these people. Yeah, there's a lot of people that did that, but the Cathars didn't. Right? And he said, no, fuck that. No. I'm not like, I don't care. I'm not living like that. No. And so, I've been I've been studying many different fields for many years, but what's really interesting is watching how they're all converging finally. You're starting to see the relationship of maritime admiralty law and how our financial system's set up and how governments are actually corporations pretending to be governments when they're actually corporations that have set up the entire world in servitude. All this stuff, we've got to get everybody in the world to have a birth certificate. Everybody deserves to be a person, tricking you in with these words like person. There's no such thing. Person, people think this is just politically correct language for being gender neutral in the late 21st century, early 21st century. It's not. Person goes back. You can look in the legal dictionary. I have one here. I mean, it goes back 500 years. And it really goes back to things like, the Cestui Que Vie Act of 1666 with the Fire of London, when they killed a lot of people, and they created these laws where they assumed all people are dead. Everyone's dead unless they prove that they're alive. And so the system runs off. People are like, how does it get away with this? Well, because the system assumes we're all dead until we prove that we're alive. And so all of our things are dead man things that we operate through this mask, this persona, because that's what the word person comes from. It comes from the Latin phrase for persona. A persona is a mask. A mask would be a theatrical mask that people would wear that would have the shape of Aphrodite or Dionysus or whoever. And when you donned the mask, you became Aphrodite. There's this weird magic aspect to it and everything too. So don't think for 2 seconds that the entire financial and legal system doesn't go straight back to Babylon, doesn't still go back to the church and everything else, and that it's a money magic system that is a control system set up by, our malevolent operators, shall we call them. And that's, it's a great way to invade a planet, by the way, these things.
Yeah. As they dumbed us down, now this is debatable in our community. Some people think we did have abilities, some people think we didn't. I'm personally of the belief that we had a lot more abilities thousands of years ago than we do now.
Well, you just proved earlier, look, you know handwriting. Your own daughter doesn't. Look how much can change in one generation.
That's true.
Sorry to interrupt, but just for concrete examples.
But what I was getting at is like
people don't even know how to microwave their own food nowadays, let alone create fabric.
Yeah.
Right? Sorry. Keep going. I just thought of I've
actually called Stingy an alchemist before. But what I was gonna say is would that be done in the same way to get rid of our natural abilities like remote viewing, telekinesis, all of these things that people in our community believe or don't believe that they exist? But I personally think we used to have these abilities. Do you think that's how the same pattern, the same MO, I guess, just to gradually dumb us down and take shit away from us to make us this subservient?
Of course. Well, I think the problem is that people with those abilities, not like, oh, everybody had them in the past. No, I think there's always just been certain individuals that have them. And it's maybe more prevalent in certain cultures because perhaps they have respect for certain traditions still, right? So, for example, going back to the mushrooms, you have it's actually, I think it's not the Sami, that's in Sweden, but there's the group in Siberia, right? Where shamanism really comes from is Siberia, like what we call shamanism today. Like there is, South American in that, but shamanism proper comes from Siberia, and it's related to the people who, they're hunters and that, but they encountered theogenic mushrooms and things like this. I don't remember why I was trying to bring up that point, the shamans, but Yeah, there's been some people who have certain cultures more than others. Certain cultures, say the Irish, certain Celtic cultures, for example, very strong with their magical tradition. They still pass down the stories. And think about it even as a child. I know, like when my great uncle, my grandfather's brother, we'd go visit him all the time, and he's from Ireland. And he loved telling us stories about the leprechauns and all the old stories as kids. And I love that stuff. And then we go around his garden after and look through the garden and try to see if we could find a leprechaun or something. And just facilitating keeping those stories alive, and then plus a child's power that isn't being conditioned yet, means that they have the capacity to experience those things again. So it doesn't have to be that it's just like it's lost to time and whatever, but again, controlling the mind is going to turn a potential experience where adults laugh at them and tell them it's ridiculous, go back to bed, we want to, have our adult time, or one where like, oh, okay, and we see that, say, for example, in First Nations communities or whatever, they look at children a different way when they communicate certain things. So I think the abilities are always there, and different individuals maybe have a better talent for it, but it's never really been gone. When I lived in Laos, for example, the monks talk about in the war, like in the Vietnam War, because Laos was secretly involved in the Vietnam War with the whole Ho Chi Minh Trail thing and the whatever. But they didn't have even, Laos is very underdeveloped. The monks communicated through telepathy across towns with each other, And this is an open fact. Nobody contests it. It's like, oh yeah, they know how to do that. So, and even here in today's world, there's still many people that we have many different space times on this planet. People love to, this is the whole problem with what's called the world picture. We think it is a unified thing, but you actually go traveling, you realize you don't just travel through space, you travel through time. You're seeing different, some people are really living like, I live on where I do on Vancouver Island. To me, it's still like the 70s to some of these people, 70s and 80s still like that's far back in time. Some of the social conventions and attitudes and lifestyles is in many ways, right? So there's many different. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not just like it's there in the past and it's closed and it's gone. I think we always have had these things, and it's these control structures that determine whether people can practice these things, talk about these things, have a community where these things are shared. That I think has always been something under threat, and that's I think what the Gnostics were about as well. Is they were saying, like a great person to look at a lot of this through is, say, the I loved the science fiction writer Philip K. Dick. I don't know if you know him, but I've read almost all, I think all of his novels and short stories, and I love that. I was introduced to me. A friend took a science fiction class at university, and I started getting into those books. And all of his books are like modern Gnosticism, right? And one of the weird things that Philip K. Dick believed was he had a really strange period in his life, and he was an oddball to begin with, but he claims that he had this whole thing start with like seeing somebody's Jesus fish one day, that it transfigured him, and he was able to, this is really weird, he had a mystical experience, and it wasn't just like, oh, he saw light or an angel or anything. He was fluent suddenly for like a week or two in Aramaic, like the language of like Jesus from 2,000 years ago. He never studied it. Suddenly he knew Aramaic. He also diagnosed his son with a very rare condition and got him to go to the hospital. And he told them exactly what the problem was and where and why and how. And it would completely have gone over the top specialists if he didn't point out exactly what it was and saved his son's life. And he came out of it and he believed, and he was getting visions of seeing the past. He was seeing literally from 2,000 years ago at the same time. And he realized, he believed that we were in the illusion of time. He contended that we actually lived in the time of Christ still, that Christ had just finished dying, and that the demiurge had created the illusion of time so that people wouldn't realize that the return of Christ was imminent, and to get them to falter from their path. Whoa, right? Like crazy. But it's a sort of out there thing you got to push, really go out there for you to even get a close approximation to the truth on things. But it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I'm sorry if that's a weird tangent to go into, but yeah.
No, you one I'll tell you on the air and one I'll tell you off the air because I don't want to piss anybody off.
Sure.
When Karen asked me about the whole holographic matrix thing, again, I'm not calling myself stupid, but I did drop out in grade 10. I just want to preference that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I woke up and had a fairly good understanding of quantum physics the one day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've never studied it, but everything I read, I understood, and I could put it all together when I wrote that paper, and it was just ridiculous because I'm like, I know I don't know this. I don't know where this is coming from, but I understand every damn word. I understand every figure. It's this, this, and this, and it just went together.
Mm-hmm.
So I get it, and that's why I was kind of alluding to, like, do you think these things can come back?
So
Because I've had
what you did is you came into knowledge, and your knowledge was not taught, and in fact, you probably tap into, people call it downloads. I think it's more like Neo in the Matrix when he says, I learned Kung Fu, and it's like that. It's it's not so much downloading anything. It's more like how they have these fancy EV cars nowadays. You know, like the one thing for these electric vehicles, their engines are miraculous. They can go really fast. And so what they actually have to do is put software in to make the less expensive models not work as fast. And you have to pay for the feature on a subscription basis if you want to unlock turbo and all these other features, right? And so
oh my god,
I think it's a wonderful example though of exactly how our abilities work.
yeah.
It's just a feature that's turned on or off of a switch.
I
Because
agree with that.
you are a multidimensional being, most likely. You know, you're not just an NPC. You're a multidimensional being, which means you transcend space and time. You're living concurrent. How many concurrent lifetimes are you living? Can you possibly imagine?
4 that I've seen.
But and that in itself is impressive. But imagine that there's just a vast quantity, right? Innumerable in some ways, for our minds to comprehend. So yeah, why wouldn't we be able to pull something that we know from something else? Or even if that's even necessary, that we had to learn it at all in the first place. So there's this really interesting aspect of remembering again, right? So we can keep coming on, and that's the best way to talk about things like mysticism. You have to keep going back, go through some examples, then you get into some new details and working with it. But yeah, so you're remembering things, and your memory is like, that's power, right? Because forgetting things is to be obviously out of power. The people who forget, oh, wait a second, the last time I voted for that this way, this happened. It happens. It's amazing how just the election system works. To me, it's obviously a system of magic. Who in their right mind would continue to vote? It's absolutely insane. It doesn't matter. Every single time, it doesn't work. every single time.
It's the same fucking bird.
Political party, different candidates, etc. Like maybe there's periods of blessings because the general world economy is good, or it's working with certain astrological energies that put it more of in a boom period. But there's no like these people got it right. Like just the religion of political parties and people voting and not, and every time they're like, and if you go back, I think every single election in history is being called the most important election ever. I don't think they've ever branded an election as, well, this isn't a very important election. It's not a make or break. The world will end if you don't vote the right way kind of thing. I mean, it's so absurd. Anyhow.
The complacent year.
Well, because it's the real operation behind it is giving over your power.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do anything about changing things. I will say this guy, my union rep, I'll call a member of parliament or a congressman who's corrupt as the day is long. That's the person. Whatever they decide, well, that's the way I got to go. That's insane.
Yeah.
I don't mean to, but I'd like to bring in the politics, like that politics is a religion. You know, a lot of people nowadays, they love to think we're past religion, religion's over. No, politics is a very powerful religion. Look, it's all based on belief.
Right? Yep.
How men should live, what we should do, blah, 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 blah. We got to sacrifice more for this God called the economy. Change the word economy with Moloch, and you probably got a good idea about what's going on. It's like you got to sacrifice it. Oh, more virgins. Moloch's angry. You know, like we got to cut more social programs, or we got to do this, or we got to make sacrifices. Anyhow.
Yeah. Well, and Spin just said too, like the shaming, like, okay, yeah, for functionality, we live in Alberta, we own a pickup truck. It snows here a lot and the roads are shit. Mm-hmm. But, there's people that live in the flatter parts and kind of look down their nose because, I'm driving a 400 horsepower Hemi and you're driving an EV and I'm the asshole. Or, look down your nose at me, but you have a private jet. Like, it's like, well, that's a little hypocritical too. Like, the people that are telling us not to drive my pickup truck are the ones that are flying with like two people on a fucking jet.
Yeah.
To go to, like, you can't fly economy. You can't be like the rest of us. You're better than us now. You can't travel that way.
Well, what it really is saying is we're on the winning team. They don't care about what's right. Anybody who had any degree of logic would see the obviousness. But when you suspend everything for the religion, your political party religion, all logic goes out the window. That's the whole point of it. It's pretty silly. I mean, they're just, in some ways they're just they're given more control units. That's another word I call for money, control units. They're given more control units because they're highly controlled. Therefore, they're rewarded with control units, right? The people who are a threat are given less control units, don't have as many control units, so that they don't have the time to spend meditating or doing what you have the last few months and working on yourself and your awakening and everything. They would just be like, oh, I got to do this, I got to pay for that $100,000 truck. There's payments every 2 weeks, $499 or plus insurance and $1,000 worth of gas a month. But, and so they trap them in all these things. And that's what the Gnostics were trying to say. Like, look, be careful of materialism. It can be a very dangerous thing in how you can sacrifice your life for, it's like saying, like boasting that you're a millionaire in a video game. Like, who gives a fuck? Look, I got a yacht in a video game. Well, That doesn't sound impressive. And you can imagine how impressive it sounds to your higher self if you have a bunch of nonsense like that and boasting about your material existence on what's supposed to be your mission here.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this guy. At it again. We'll have to give him more tragedy until he wakes up or something, because this guy is way too foregone. He's got Stockholm syndrome bad, baby. He likes it. He likes the prison. We got to show him the prison is not where you want to be.
Spinge is just dying because she's got a family member in that boat. Trying not to giggle on the mic.
No, I hear you. And, and I think when you work on your consciousness to a certain degree, you need to be able to, and sometimes, like you say, okay, we got a temporary plan until we can do this and get to our spot. Okay, we'll play the game a bit. And
Yeah.
just like I've had to do the past while, I've been wanting to get out of this game for a long time because I detest slavery. Many years ago, I taught about Frederick Douglass, the American slave who taught himself to read and write and emancipated himself. Like he ran away from his slave owners like multiple times, which was really bad back then. And he ended up becoming like the American ambassador to Haiti. He's one of the most eloquent people you ever read. It's the most powerful biography you will ever read in your life. Anybody who wants to complain that their life is inconvenient or difficult whatsoever should read his life first. You know, um, and then say that you can't do something with your life. But see, the difference was he decided not to be a slave, right? And he just couldn't. Once he had the knowledge, in fact, he cursed being able to learn how to read because he said it was so much easier being an ignorant slave. Now that I have knowledge, I have this responsibility towards not letting this happen. And in fact, even helping out my fellow men who are also living in this institution of slavery. So I think that's a big part of it too, right? It's the responsibility angle with the knowledge, right? So
that really just hit home, dude.
we're not meant to just do the Instagram lifestyle on the $100 million yacht and shit like that. This is not our function. I don't care how great you are with your spiritual gifts. If you are on a damn yacht and doing Instagram things, you've been seduced. Yeah. But not to say that's a common thing or whatever. But I mean, you got plenty of people like this. Look at the cult following, and I even had a person who's trying to get me into it at one point because I was in a difficult position in the pandemic. I'd just come back to Canada. There's no jobs available whatsoever, and anyhow, this guy who's all this stuff with Tony Robbins. That I mean, look at that. I mean, people worship Tony Robbins. Worship Tony Robbins. Like, move over Orthodox religious zealots. There's people who like Tony Robbins in the crowd. Like, these people are really have to dedicate themselves to these types of cults. So we're always doing this stuff anyway, is my point. Whether you want to think you need to study, and that's the shame is people could study Gnosticism and study all the book side of it, but without integrating the knowledge and understanding how that relates to your present world now, and not just casually throwing around words like the matrix and this and that and da da da. But let's get to understand how it works. I'm interested, because our lives right now are being controlled by these mortgages, right? And they look at it and they say, well, how much can the average human being in this country make? Okay, blah. Okay, so let's make a house this much. So it'll always take this much of their time. You notice how we never seem to get ahead? A century after industrial wealth creation, we have the technology, we have the manpower, we have the resources, and yet we're still working away so much. We're paying more taxes than ever. Things are more expensive than ever. And so what? You got a smartphone, or you can have DoorDash, or you can have, Uber Eats Thai food once a week or something. It's not a very significant accomplishment. I mean, we're not at the point where we're like, well, I work, 10 to 12 hours a week. And when I work, and, I have a sabbatical every few years for a year or so, and or I take 3 or 4 months off a year. Even if you go back to our agricultural ancestors, how many months were they working? Okay, they did work all the time, but you have the agricultural season, you have preserving and some preparation, but other than that, you have a huge chunk of time where people read and they spun fabric and they whittled wood and they wrote poems and they did their church, and they had, that's where we created culture. And yet we think we're so much better off than somehow people a century ago
You
or
and
150 years ago.
you and I were actually talking about this when we were just shooting the shit the one day about how like peasants in the Middle Ages worked 110, 130 days a year
Yeah.
and were given holidays and bursaries and like gifts. Like, we look like the morons, people. Like,
We should want, feudalism was great in comparison to what we live in neo-feudalism, which is way worse. It's still feudalism, but it's a much worse form. The rents are more, you pay it all yourself. Sorry.
no, I totally agree. Like, that's something I've come to. Like, I always, when I'm listening to podcasts and I'm listening to people about the trap, society is the unnatural trap. We're supposed to live in small communities or family groups and help each other out. But this mega 15-minute technocracy that's rolling down the fucking pipe is unnatural. Even the way it is now is unnatural.
Oh, far. Look what they had to do. Think about it. Okay. It was very difficult to get people to move into cities in the past. Very hard. Nobody in their right mind wanted to live in a city. It had terrible hygiene, pollution, everything, right? You had, it might be that you had looser morals or access to go to a tavern and have access to vices and that, but and some culture, but that's about it. So I mean, when you look at it, say again, like 1890s to say 1920s and that, look how beautiful the homes were in a city. You see those old, beautiful, stately Victorian homes and those wraparound porches and that. I mean, they had to make a pretty, pretty box to seduce people to move into the city, right?
Yeah.
They had to make the public parks and then to sort of make it attractive enough for people to want to go there. It also helped that they destroyed the change through the monetary system, the capacity to run on the small farm. And by the Depression, they completely eliminated the concept of a family farm, right? That was gone. Everything after that was a hobby farm if you still had a farm. But so where do people, and then so people had to go into cities, and they even make commodities good when they start them out, right? Look how nice cars were and everything else. And then over time, they can just cheapen it and cheapen it because people aren't even realizing it. They're not complaining. Look how crappy. You look at these, you look at cars in the 70s and you look at cars today. You look at a Cadillac from the 60s or 70s, you look at something. It's such a joke. I mean,
Yeah.
a Cadillac doesn't look any different than any other model of car, other than you have to see the Cadillac logo on it. And maybe, oh, look, it's got some leather interior or something, but there's nothing really that appealing about it. So yeah, you're right. It is a trap. And this is the whole point, is to get you to play within the game of the persona, because what they control really is very little. It's all in the real estate in your mind. That's the most important real estate on the planet, is between the two temples here, right? And all of their stuff is flat. It's paper based, right? It's an abstraction. It's not even physical. It's an abstraction. A mortgage is an abstraction. All of these things are abstractions, but they get you to animate and bring to life these abstractions when you start to play the game. And like you said, you got the government paper you had to sign for your daughter. And that's how you begin the game of the abstraction. It's one of the reasons why, people think it's so weird I don't drive, but it's like one of the things is because I started to come into the knowledge about the law better, and I was like, well, I disagree with the idea that I need to apply to the government to ride a vehicle. This is stupid. Like, I totally disagree with the idea. Oh, but people, have you seen how people drive anyway? They already drive like maniacs. It's not like a driver's license ensures people drive well, unless they have a cop ready to like beat them. People drive terribly. I kill people every day with driving, and then we live in Canada where everything, unless you live in one of the 3 metro centers and in the downtown, good luck living on mass transit, right? So I mean, you set up a place where you pretty much have to have a car or some vehicle to be able to even get around. Why would I need to apply for a permit to be able to do that? And of course, the reality is in many ways you don't, but in functional ways you have to admit that you're going to have to, or they're just going to make your life difficult unless you learn how to properly emancipate yourself from that system. But they're always getting you to sign it. So even when you look at it, what do we call writing? The writing that you were talking about with your daughter, not printing. You call it, what do you call it? Style of writing?
Cursive.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that etymologically this is correct, but I think functionally the metaphor is helpful. And what do you do? And every time you're signing a document, guess what you're doing? You're cursing yourself. That's how the system works.
And spelling my name.
You're cursing yourself. Damning myself. Sign here. Just sign here. Isn't that what they get soldiers to do when they want to sign them up for service? Just sign here.
Yeah.
They're a pledge. I'm sorry to be angry, but it just drives me crazy. We have a system of global human bondage. These people, that reminds me of slavery. Slavery didn't end. They ended involuntary slavery. The United States didn't say anything about voluntary slavery. Voluntary slavery is perfectly legal.
Yep.
Right. And so we're secretly, without knowing it, and you can know it, like even my dad, when my dad went to sign his mortgage, I remember because they sold his starter home and we went to the bank to get the mortgage for the new house. And my dad signing the papers, about to sign the paper, he's actually reading through, like you are supposed to with these things, but you don't understand. So you get a lawyer, and the lawyer's like, oh yeah, that's good. Because the lawyer doesn't tell you he's getting a big cut from the banker. They're both playing the same game. Your lawyer is not your lawyer. His job is he works for the bar. That's like he works for the bank, right? It's not different. And so, but what does it say? I have received, or I am the owner. When you sign for a mortgage, you say that you have that home. No, you don't. Or you wouldn't be signing it. It'd already be yours. So they get you to commit this fraud, and you don't even know that you're committing fraud, and they get you so that you actually, even though everything in their document is fraudulent and criminal, you don't have recourse because you committed fraud by saying it inaccurate. You lied when you did the document to begin with, you see.
That is so fucked up.
It says, I have received X amount of money for this old house. And that's what my dad questioned. He's like, but I haven't received the money. They're like, oh, don't worry, in 20 minutes we'll give you the money. It's like, yeah, but he was brought up in England, so they're back in the 60s and that. So they're really strict with grammar, back then. So no, it says received. I haven't received it. They're like, well, what we do is we take this and then we fax it, and then it goes to the banks, and then we get them to cut a check. He's like, yeah, but give me the money and then I'll sign it. And they're like, that I've received it. I'm like, it doesn't work that way. And it's like, but why not? Like, I don't think it went this many back and forth, but it was sort of this nature, right? And I remember as a kid, I'm like, this is really weird. Because my dad was right.
Yeah.
He didn't receive money. And they, in the end, they just say, Mr. Armstrong, if you want your money, sign the paper. But we do, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's all us. This is also the nature and answers the paradox of sort of the free will. A lot of people say here, well, I consented to be here. There's no way I would consent to do this. And I hear people, like, I like to entertain both perspectives because I bounce back and forth between them all the time. And then there's people like, no, you knew, but da 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 da. And reality is probably something else, but probably, I would say, largely ignorant. Just like the average person signing their mortgage is completely ignorant of how it works, everything governing it, what amortized interest even is, let alone being able to compute it and realize they can't afford their mortgage and that the bank is doing predatory lending on purpose so that in 5 years after the bubble bursts, they're not, or the interest rates go up, they're not going to be able to make the payments and the bank takes everything. That's what the people in China are learning right now. They thought they were all overnight millionaires the past few years. Well, now they're finding out they're not. And the house is taken away from them and they owe the money forever. And they have the social credit system that won't even let them rent a car or go on a high-speed train or anything else because of their social credit score. In fact, if you call a person with a bad social credit score in China on the phone, they will even get an operator come on and say, this person has a low social credit score. You might consider whether or not you want to talk to them.
Oh, shit.
So,
Yeah, let me out. I want off. I want off. I'm done. I want off the whole fucking train.
all right, me too. I'm. This is unacceptable. This is
Yeah.
absolutely unacceptable. So
Well,
I'm very excited now that, and you guys never have to worry about the money side, and you're smart enough, and I can figure it out. I've done this stuff with the law, and I'm very happy. I got great news today where somebody's taken a few further steps that I was waiting for because I didn't want to do it all, trying to figure out everything on my own. And yeah, that's looking really good for us, at least in Canada. It can be translated into other systems, but it'll take more work before it's a very step-by-step easy process. And there's a lot of different approaches out there to it, but I think we don't really get off grid unless we learn how to get off grid within the paperwork of the system. Because guess what? I don't care how far away you go. They're going to be able to send drones with guns and shoot your farmstead up if they want to really go after you. There is no such thing as security. But if you know how to legally emancipate yourself, as well as financially, and it's in financial and legal emancipation at the same time, if you know how to do that, you're untouchable. They don't have the right to touch you anymore. And to me, that's really important. It's a lot more important than how many cans of beans I got stored or something else. Those things are practical and important, but I think people like to focus just on what's the known knowns. And sometimes we have to go into the like really realize how deep the rabbit hole goes in some ways, but really find a solution. Say, this is unacceptable. And that's what I've done. And I'm happy because I could have compromised many times my personal ethics in life for the sake of money. I had more than enough opportunity to get into politics, a lot. Like I was with the G7 finance environment ministers on a river, a luncheon, a boat luncheon with Sheila Copps and everything back when I was a teenager. I mean, I had all the opportunities to go and do all those things, work in public relations, this, that, and the other. But every time I just saw the corruption in it. I was like, I know I'm not going to be able to keep my mouth shut in that kind of environment. Only so long before I'm eventually going to just say, I can't stand this, or tell somebody what I really think about them, So I think it's good we have promised that we don't necessarily have to live in poverty. I'm sorry, I'm distracting from the Gnosticism, but it's somewhat related.
no, it's all good knowledge, and this is part of it too. Like I think why a lot of us don't understand this is all of this knowledge gets hidden away. Like the large majority of people that are ever going to watch my show went through the public education system and don't know a fucking thing about what you just explained.
Of course. You know, some people like to joke and call it the public fool system rather than school system, right? Because it teaches you how to be the fool. And it's so sad because, you know, obviously it shouldn't be that. And I'm not saying there's good things that we don't learn from it. And I'm glad that I got the skills and some of the knowledge I had. But that's the whole trap in it, is that if you don't get your ego right and other things, if your value of yourself is based on what other people say, then you're going to be trapped in those systems, right? You're going to stay being the corrupt lawyer or banker or, you know, whatever profession it is. I'm not saying they're bad necessarily, but I think I've never been in something where I don't learn to smell the shit pretty quick. You know, I can see through a lot of things pretty fast. And even if I'm like all enamored and in love with an idea for a while, it's only so long before reality sinks in and you're like, wait a second here.
Yeah. That doesn't look right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just think it's empowerment. So the whole point is that we get to the point of, if I really want to put it with the Gnostic thing right, it's that the knowledge should lead to our sense of empowerment, but not an ego empowerment, but also at the same time being aware and conscious, trying to take responsibility for ourselves and seeing through this and not resting on our laurels and just, oh, I know it's the Matrix and this and that. This is the big problem I have with the truther community. I even see with like a lot of the people in Canada post convoy. They think they know it all. These people who woke up in like a short period, and they're not even like what you've done, right? They haven't even gotten to the spiritual side. They're just like, oh, there's corruption in politics. Woo! You know? And I actually think it's all the Trudeau boogeyman or something. And they're like, dude, please stop being so amateur. This stuff goes on long before that guy came on stage. Right?
Well, wait, there's more.
Yeah. So it's empowerment and real, and that's why Francis Bacon said knowledge is power. Right?
Yeah.
Francis Bacon should know because he's one of the smartest people that ever existed and set up most of this stuff to begin with. He knows. And not having knowledge is to be disempowered, is the opposite side of that. So you see that the occult is based on keeping you seeing a certain way, like we were talking last time with the horse blinders. So you just keep focusing on being a good old beast of burden. Keep pulling that cart, donkey. You're just an ass. You're a fool in their system. And their attitude is, if you're not dissatisfied enough to be able to figure out that there's this a problem, and B, how to see through it, then you know what? You deserve it. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think there's plenty of opportunity that we can, regardless of your educational background or not. You came into the same level of understanding without everything, and it's happened, right? Because you made personal choices to start to accept and take a leap, have a bit of faith, make yourself vulnerable, take a risk, do something quite against the unconventional, because you had to be what? True to yourself, right?
Yeah.
That was critical for you. And when you weren't being true to yourself, you know what your old lifestyle was, right? And that's what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have unpacked a lot tonight, Dan, and I want to thank you for that.
Yeah.
Do you want to let everybody know, because you also do some pretty incredible healing sessions?
Yeah, he does.
And do you want to shout that out before we wrap this up?
Absolutely. You know, my big thing is, of course, I do the true quantum healing. It's a modality most people aren't familiar with. It's not QHHT and other things. And I do that, and it's just so wonderful. The simplest way I can put it is getting in touch with your higher self, letting your higher self help to uncover your own gnosis, your personal gnosis. There's a lot going on in the background in your life that we don't realize on the subconscious level, all the things that go on. And we don't have to be a victim. We can undo any knot. So creator, the true creator does give us the capacity to heal. And our healing is our responsibility, because as we heal, the world heals. And so it's extremely important that, let's look at health issues, everything else. All of this is trying to tell you, get into alignment with your higher self. All of the issues that we have. And I've learned this, trust me, the very, very, very hard way. And I'm constantly tested and have to learn it again. But so I do the sessions. I basically just, at this point, I'm looking at it as a donation basis. You've experienced it yourself. We get into parts of your psyche through your higher self, and that. I mean, we've been able to see things that are uniquely for you. And sorry.
Spencer and I both can attest that we have had some phenomenal sessions. It like breakthroughs. She's had stuff with her estranged father. I've had emotional things and energy issues dealt with. Like all of this is, in my opinion, I'm not trying to give Dan a sales pitch here, but it's pretty valid. Like I know I experienced and how much better I felt after. So
and generally the main thing is you feel more empowered, right? The end of it, like sometimes it might be scary information. Ooh, but so what? Life can be messy. And so TQH is a wonderful way to start to peel behind the paint of some of this and start empowering yourself and getting into aligning with your purpose, because your purpose wasn't to play a game of Monopoly here. You did have a purpose, and it's your job to figure it out and keep working on that. And so, we do have tools available to us, so we don't have to stay victims. And so I just want to share that with people. And I love it because to me, every person I get to work with, it helps my faith and my trust in understanding all of this. And the more you can take the pressure off yourself that you have to, that it's just you or it's you and your partner or whatever. No, we have excellent resources available to us. And when we align with a higher self more, and when we learn how to trust in it and follow those paths and we can do great things in our life, and we can get it to be what we want, so that we don't have to keep repeating the pain and the lessons. So it's in.
All right. What is your website or your email if people want to get a hold of you?
I'm still doing the damn website. I get so lost in doing my research at times. So I'm sorry about that. My email is, let's do this one today. I do my other one, the Proton and that, but so you see my name there, Dan Armstrong. So we have also the Proton is Mr. Daniel Armstrong at protonmail.com. My Hotmail is from a Philip K. Dick novel, Stanton Mick, STANTONMICK at hotmail.com. And we'll just do a Zoom thing, and we can just say hello. You can email me. We can do a TQH, but I highly recommend doing it. Just let it happen. Sometimes you may find a few things that try to stop you in your life from getting in contact with me or following through on it. So all I have to say is, if something urges you towards it, listen to your intuition, do it, and just experience it and go from there. You'll like it.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan. That was almost 2 hours of just.
I can't even believe that was 2 hours. I'm so sorry. I didn't. I'm like, maybe it was an hour and 15 minutes. Of course, it was 2 hours.
I don't know, but I can't wait till next month, because I hope you will come back again once my brain absorbs everything. I can figure out what we should talk about.
Yeah, you ask me any of the questions about, and guys, it doesn't just have to be about TQH. I don't have time to do everything, but I can give you a few links or good things to read and do some of your own stuff if you want. That's cool. So it doesn't have to be for that. Just contact me. It's cool. Yeah, and see you
Okay.
soon.
Thank you, everybody. I'm just going to cut the feed because I still don't know how to get out of